Dr. Nair is going to speak a little.
Okay, so Dr. Bindu Nair is also going to speak with us. I'm sorry, I missed that. She got added. She's Director for Basic Research within OUSD-R&E. She's responsible for oversight and coordination of the department's $2.5 billion in basic science. Thanks. Sorry.
No worries. Good morning. Thank you. You know, I'm just pleased to be here on Louie's behalf to say thank you to Puna and Ruth on running this study for us, because it is hugely important to us, as you can imagine. So in our office, we have DoD STEM, and part of what we do within the Department of Defense STEM office is to look at all of the 3 services as well as our components, and understand the STEM programming in each of them, as well as run some programs on our own. And so, you know, all of us are committed to supporting STEM, both in our communities and nationally. And so part of studies like this really help us understand, you know, where we're making impact, what we should be doing, where we should be thinking better, and how we should be thinking about our nation's competitive advantage in STEM and how to develop it and build it. And some of the questions that you guys were talking about at the last speaker are absolutely exactly the questions that we need to think about, to include this question of, does the DoD know what it needs into the future? And so the answer is yes-ish. And so we're happy to talk about that. This study originated from conference report language accompanying the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020, which requested that our boss, the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Heidi Shyu, commission a study to develop policy options and recommendations to promote the collaboration between the Department of Defense and our industry partners, to come up with how we think about STEM in general, and you know, how we can sort of harness or combine the power of our engagement as well as our DIB engagement to see where we can do better and how we can do a little bit better. So thank you to the PIs of the study again, and I look forward to hearing from them. And thank you for giving me the chance to chat with you all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. You've set us up really well for this morning. I'd also like to mention that Dr. David is also on the call with us. So, but I'll give the presentation. We can direct all hard questions toward her. I think she's slightly staying off of video. So it is our pleasure to introduce you to our study. As Dr. Nair mentioned, this particular task came from a congressional mandate. And the going in assumption behind this language is that there would be benefits, given that the DoD and its industrial base are actually heavily engaged in STEM education activities. And the presumption is that there would be some benefits from collaboration. So our task was to find any collaborations that exist, and also to identify opportunities where new collaborations might be forged. So we were to look at areas where DoD's motivations align with the industrial base and find ways to promote partnerships through these shared motivations. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to provide a little more detail about the tasking, our research approach, and then our final recommendations. But first, I'd like to spend some time setting up the broader context for this work. And I wanted to start with sort of our bottom line, the case for action by DoD and its industrial base. And I do this in part because in conducting this research, we met with a lot of senior leaders, both in the DoD and the industrial base. And we were oftentimes quite a bit clearer. But among senior leadership who are managing in a tight budgetary time, they wanted to understand the why. Why is it important? Because there are a lot of organizations and people really operating in this space. And so at the end of our study, we pulled together top-level bullets of what we thought were important. And the key point, really the takeaway, is that a skilled STEM workforce is especially critical in the defense ecosystem across the board. And now we heard a lot of domains and themes during yesterday's discussions, panel sessions where we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, innovation. all domains that require a really strong, competent technical workforce. And as one of the speakers spoke yesterday, more of the advanced R&D and manufacturing back into the US, which has pretty big implications from a national security perspective. So really, the DoD and the DIP have a common mission, and they need similar types of talent, and that shortfalls in this talent base are a shared risk to both entities. We also believe that the technical personnel currently operating in the DoD and the industrial base, as well as alums from this community, they're uniquely qualified to engage and inspire future talent. And so this is where we say the DoD and the DIP come into place within the STEM ecosystem. So these STEM workers in this space, they can really speak to the work that they do, how meaningful it is, the range of careers, the range of projects, experiments, the commitment, the worth of the work. So they really are well positioned to translate into the broader realm what it is they do. So we really believe, in a nutshell, that working together is the linchpin in this area, and that working together can bring coherence to existing activities that are underway, while also building a joint strategy to shape future initiatives. So now this is a chart we put together simply because we heard so many people use the term pipeline, and not to take a shot at the previous presenters, we just felt that the term pathway is a little bit more applicable in this space as we were communicating our work out. And before I talk about the pathways themselves, I'd like to highlight our attempt to represent the spectrum of STEM careers that make up the national security STEM workforce. And Bill and John really set us up well here, where they spoke about the skilled technical workforce, which is the labor pool that doesn't necessarily have a bachelor's degree. So they could be workers with a high school degree and certificate and credentials, or those with a 2-year degree. They really have the technical expertise, just not the advanced degrees. This particular workforce has been getting increasing attention in the database community, especially with NSF starting to report the skilled technical workforce as part of their overall STEM workforce reports that come out every few years. In fact, according to a 2020 NSP study, the skilled technical workforce makes up 55% of the overall US STEM workforce. So a pretty considerable proportion there. So we wanted to make sure that the graphic kind of reflects the spectrum of careers within the national security space. And now returning to the pathways themselves, the process is still linear through high school. However, one of the things we added to this chart is the blurring of the boundary between high school and post-secondary, particularly with all of the dual enrollment options that exist today. Now, many of the students take advantage of these programs, and many programs are actually built around these dual enrollment options. And a very interesting example of this is something called the PTech 9 through 14 program. It originally came out of IBM. It basically puts together a high school with a 2-year institution, be that a technical institute or a community college, and industrial partners in preparing students from 9 through 12, as well as 2 years into their community college degree, preparing them to enter the skilled technical workforce. And then the role of the industrial partners in this program is to provide work experiences, internships, apprenticeships, starting in high school, but also to get involved in curriculum development, because these are the partners that really understand the needs of the local workforce, the skills and the competencies. So they are at the table when the curriculum is being developed. Sorry about that. So this program has been very successful in a number of areas. In fact, in some instances, it is even supported at the state level. So we believe that the PTech model is something worth exploring more widely. In this chart, we also included the notion of upskilling and reskilling, and then the cycling that will happen either in terms of certificates and credentials, or even with the workers going back to get another degree. But we believe that this notion of reskilling and upskilling through the employee's life cycle is crucial, well, for 2 primary reasons. The first one being the rapidly evolving nature of technologies. As some of the previous speakers talked about, technology is changing rapidly, so the skills and competencies are also going to be rapidly needing to evolve to keep up. And another reason is the nature of employment itself is changing. And what I mean by that is the notion of a lifer is somewhat becoming obsolete. You're going to see a lot of young workers who are moving between career paths, moving between employers. They don't sometimes they don't stay with a particular organization for 20 or 30 years. So how do we consider the needs of this younger workforce as they move through, get new certificates, credentials, and move through the overall ecosystem? So the ability to reskill and upskill can actually lead to meaningful jobs within the larger defense ecosystem. So that could be within the DoD, within the industrial base, and possibly with workers moving between the two entities, which we believe is probably an overall win for the national security space. Finally, we also try to highlight critical roles for the DoD and the DIB across the entire set of pathways. So we're trying to emphasize the broader impacts of these interventions that occur across the different phases. And one that I really like to point out is the engage and inspire portion. This is where we feel that the DoD and the industrial base can actually speak to students, create awareness, engage and inspire them. And this is particularly important as if you speak to anyone in the STEM world with a STEM career and you ask them what inspired them, you're going to get a whole range of answers. For some people, it was a parent. For some people, it was the guest astronaut that came and spoke at their school. For some folks, it's a movie, it's a video game. So the more that students are exposed to, the higher the likelihood of them kind of being inspired and engaged with STEM careers. And this is a space that the DoD and the defense industrial base can really use their breadth of STEM institutional knowledge to bring to bear with some of these students. Now, one of the things we uncovered, excuse me, is a model called collective impact, which came out of the Stanford Social Innovation Review a little over a decade ago. And we like it because it is intended for these kinds of, I would say, social impact efforts where there are lots of organizations working in the same space. And the model distills what it terms are 5 conditions for collective impact as shown on the slide. They seem intuitive, but our sense is that they're more rare than they are common, as this is a really challenging enterprise overall. But the way they put these conditions together makes it a little bit easier to kind of get our arms around what we want from a set of organizations that are working in the same space. One of interest is also that they noted 3 preconditions. There needs to be an influential champion, someone who thinks this is important, and this is a really critical piece of any such endeavor. And then of course, you need adequate resources, but also a sense of urgency for change to keep the effort moving. So to give you a picture of what it looks like and why we thought this was a good idea, this slide compares what we term isolated impact with the collective impact model. Our view right now is that right now the DoD and its industrial space are largely operating in the isolated impact mode. So our research indicates that while the scope and scale of STEM activities and interventions underway by both the DoD and the DIB are vast, collaboration is rare. So there's a lot of good work, a lot of organizations, a lot of support, but there's very little collaboration or coordination. And we characterize this landscape as 1,000 points of light. So each meritorious, but failing to deliver synergistic impacts. So our recommendations were focused on transitioning toward collective impact in order to focus energies and to amplify effects. We think this model is quite useful, and we're going to be focusing on that in following work. So now returning a little bit with that context to our study, I'll be very brief about this slide. So study was actually a congressionally mandated effort. It came out of the 2020 NDAA. And the 4 bullets you see at the bottom here were specifically ones we were asked to address. And we looked at them through the lens of collaboration. So the way we went about our study was in 2 phases, in part because the DoD had a report due back to the Congress regarding the mandate. So we were under contract late July last year, and in January, the interim report was due back. So we had a fairly quick burn. And so during that first phase, we focused on understanding the landscape across the DoD and the DIB in terms of different STEM-related educational activities. And we did this through a combination of literature reviews, website surveys, website reviews. We also put together an online survey that we sent out to 600 plus DIB organizations. In our research, we identified over 900 of them. We were able to find contact information for about 600. And then we did not quite get the response rate we would have hoped for. We had a 9% response rate, which is not too bad. So we were able to glean some information out of it. We had a lot of discussions and meetings with stakeholders, both in the nonprofit space, as well as program managers within the DoD who are running STEM programs, as well as some of the DIB leadership. And I'd really like to note right here that a shout out to the DoD STEM team. This particular project, it was quite hard to find quantitative data. This is not easily accessible. A lot of it, even if you go through industrial-based websites, there isn't much information on their STEM programs, the specifics of even where the STEM program falls within the companies, and a lot of, even within the DoD programs, a lot of the information isn't available on the individual website. So it's through conversations and connections that we were able to really get a better picture. So the DoD STEM team was really quite engaged and supportive with this. And then in the final report, we fleshed out in greater detail some of the topics, particularly with respect to the clearable technical workforce, incentives for collaboration, and we looked at the skilled technical workforce a little bit more in detail. Just a quick note, both reports have been approved for public distribution. They're available on the CERC website, and then the DoD STEM team is also looking to post them on their website, hopefully soon. So a few key takeaways from the research before I get into some of the recommendations themselves. The DoD and DIB collaboration on STEM education activities is rare. Although there are lots of interventions, as I mentioned, that are undertaken by both organizations, they don't really work together. But I'd first also like to take a moment to expand upon this notion of collaboration. Turns out that people describe collaboration very differently. So we went looking for examples of DoD industrial-based collaboration. It seems to mean different things to different people. And a lot of this came out in our survey in terms of the responses. So we ended up building a taxonomy, which I don't have here, but I'm just going to briefly mention it because I believe it really helps understand where people are coming from when we talk to them about partnerships and collaboration. Our taxonomy range from level 1 to 4. I won't go through every single piece, but essentially level 1 is what we call parallel engagements, where the DoD and the DIB, they support activities in the same space, but there is no collaboration. So an example of this is where when the services and industrial-based contractors, they support student teams for FIRST robotics competitions. So they're both engaged in the same space, but they're not really collaborating. It was interesting because in some of our survey responses, this was presented as a collaborative activity. And then we go all the way to level 4, which is the truly collaborative partnerships where the DoD and the industrial base work together to identify needs, then they develop and implement programs. So an example of this is Manufacturing USA, which is a public-private partnership with a focus on advanced manufacturing. So within Manufacturing USA, there were 16 institutes, each of them focused on a different advanced manufacturing technology. And regionally, they work with their industrial base, they work with education providers to come up with the curriculum and training needed for the skilled technical workforce toward that particular technology. So that is truly a collaboration in that the DoD and the industrial base sit at the same table to develop an understanding of the risk. They create programs to build the skilled technical workforce, and then they jointly monitor the effectiveness of these interventions. So our conclusion is that for real collaborative partnerships where both parties are in it together, we need to have incentives that are aligned to create a supportive environment. The next big takeaway was that the STW is of growing importance, but not very well understood. Just in terms of numbers, when we spoke to the industrial base we heard a lot about, we need more welders, we need more technicians, we need more skilled technical workforce with digital expertise as the role and the nature of some of these jobs is changing. We were really not able to get numbers in terms of what is the workforce you need, what types and categories do you need. So we believe that while it's of growing importance, it isn't really very well understood. While, as I mentioned, there is a focus on developing the STW, a lot of the focus is in the manufacturing realm, and there is a real need to consider the STW in other areas of R&D, test and evaluation, O&M, where there's newer technologies and optics, digital control systems, AI, et cetera. So there are smaller scale efforts that are really, really local and small, I would say, but these initiatives are not widespread. So one of our findings is that they need to really extend beyond the domain of manufacturing. We also saw there are very few STEM initiatives directly targeting building a clearable technical workforce. So while there are organizations that emphasize engagement with military connected families, this isn't a broad brush, strategic push. Opportunities do exist to leverage ongoing activities within STEM ecosystems. Now, I'll talk about that in a moment, so I'm not going to spend too much time. And one of our biggest findings was that current evaluation methodologies are not quite adequate for measuring collective impact. So there are several STEM programs around the nation. A lot of them do evaluate their specific programs in terms of student intake, through surveys, trying to understand participation demographics. But none of them are adequate to measure collective impact of a portfolio of programs that cater to the student population. So this brings us to what we presented as our vision for DoD and DIB collaboration. There are a lot of definitions of STEM ecosystems, and one of the better ones that we came across was put together by the organization called TIES that actually helps communities and regions build STEM ecosystems. By their definition, a STEM learning ecosystem is one that provides the architecture for cross-sector learning and offers young people access to STEM-rich learning environments. So essentially a collection of programs and initiatives, and more than a collection in terms of some of the features of a well-designed ecosystem is that it can act as a force multiplier to amplify the reach, visibility, and outcomes of individual initiatives. The ecosystem provides a range of mutually reinforcing programs to assist with learning. So this notion of mutually reinforcing programs is one we view as being critical to engaging and sustaining STEM interest. We have many programs that are one and done. So a competition that happens annually for a targeted group of students. And so while these are necessary, we believe that these are not sufficient to build the workforce that we need. A well-designed ecosystem will also provide a continuum of exposure via programs and interventions across a diverse array of topics. So while robotics is important and exciting, it's not the only one. And as we all know, students, one year they might be interested in robotics, the next year, some of them might be interested in something else. So we'd want to be able to design an ecosystem where there are programs that cater to their changing interests while still engaging and inspiring their STEM propensity. And finally, a well-designed ecosystem is also one from an organizational standpoint that can foster collaboration between all the stakeholders in terms of sharing best practices and cross-pollination of ideas. So moving away from the siloed approach of each of these programs. And another benefit is that it could become the central hub of opportunities for students, for educators, for parents, for volunteers, for engagement from companies and the industrial partners in the area, where it's a one-stop shop to find out how can you volunteer, what are the internships available, what are the online resources in terms of virtual learning aids. And so this could really make a difference to the catchment area of an ecosystem. The TIES portfolio has about 100 ecosystems now at very different levels of maturity and rigor. But we believe that this notion of considering all the programs available in a region and ensuring that there's a range of STEM activities really is critical. So we put together a vision for the DoD and the DIB collaboration through STEM ecosystems. So we think it's a good model for both the department and the industrial base to participate in existing ecosystems, not necessarily come in and invent the wheel, if you will. But they could participate in an existing ecosystem with some very specific priorities, but also understanding the value that other partners bring to the particular ecosystem so that they can leverage these activities while really focusing on DoD and DIB priorities, which are typically that the populations they want to reach, attracting students to defense missions, making sure there are enough educational pathways in that region toward these defense careers. So the model provides opportunities for both entities to collaboratively participate in existing ecosystems, to leverage the value and expertise of some of these other organizations, nonprofits, which have the expertise in some of these areas, while focusing on the defense workforce at the same time. So this would be a view of, if you had unlimited time, resources, and budget, we would love to have a system of STEM ecosystems all over the country, really helping build the regional workforce while also reaching out to maybe some of the more rural areas around them. So every student has in some way the opportunity to plug into his or her nearest ecosystem. We organized our final recommendations around 3 themes as shown here. The next several slides provide detail about all the recommendations and then the key observations that led to each one. So in the interest of time, I will not go through all the recommendations, rather I'll touch upon a few. So the first theme addresses the broad issue. Let me just paint the picture here, and then I'll go through some of the slides. So the first theme addresses the broad issue of building a diverse and clearable technical workforce for defense missions. And we also wanted to emphasize educational opportunities for veterans and military dependents through these recommendations. So the 4 areas within this where we provided specific recommendations are in terms of retaining the existing STEM workforce, prioritizing programs that are most likely to engage US citizens, raising awareness of this national security STEM opportunities, that is really to get at dispelling some of the perception issues about working for the DoD, and really helping to spread the word about the range and the depth of interesting career opportunities that exist, and also to increase the skilled technical workforce. So just to touch upon one of the recommendations in this theme, so to speak, was about internships. So the DoD offers a variety of internships across the various services. And one of our recommendations was it would be great to build a collaborative effort where you can have a central intake system for all the internship application. And this will also allow the DoD to track the interns. So there might be an intern that comes in 1 year, works at an Army research lab. Now this particular student might actually be interested in pursuing other opportunities, and they might go to a Navy lab the next summer. But this will help the DoD kind of keep track of its coming in workforce and students who are quite interested. And ideally, it would be great to have an internship portal where even the industrial base can advertise their positions, but that might be, down the road. But that would be the real vision for such a collaborative effort. The second theme focused on incentives to promote collaboration between the industrial base and the DoD. What we focused on here was executive messaging, creating financial incentives, branding incentives, and small business incentives. Executive messaging is a really important piece here where we're saying setting the tone at the top is going to drive a lot of these efforts and really help push the DoD and the DIP to work closely together. So with senior DoD leadership, in partnership with the CTOs from the various industrial-based partners, if they come together, they can really set a joint strategy for some of these down the road efforts. Another incentive we thought which would help drive behavior is having, say, an awards program where we could really focus recognition for companies that work closely with the DoD in some of these STEM engagement and outreach efforts. And finally, our last theme built on this notion of STEM ecosystems, and we were trying to explore ways to advance the ecosystems through DoD and DIP collaborative partnerships. So we wanted to emphasize pilot programs. We talked about collaborative partnerships, evaluation and assessment frameworks. How do we leverage nonprofit corporations that are already working in this space? How do we leverage models like the PTech program to build a skilled technical workforce? And also, how do we exploit the virtual environment, which has really taken off during the COVID pandemic? So I'm soon running out of time, so I'm just got 2 more slides to go. All in all, our recommendations really drove a path toward realizing collective impact. So we kept this at the back of our minds when we were putting our recommendations together and speaking with leaders. The goal really is to be able to create programs where it's not one and done. Everyone has skin in the game. The previous presenters mentioned, this is a complex and fragmented problem with over 14,000 school districts. But I hope I've been able to convince you that there is a unique role that the DoD and its industrial base can play toward engaging, inspiring, and sustaining STEM interest, eventually with moving more of the workforce toward the defense ecosystem. Our future work, we're planning to focus on the STEM ecosystems notion. We like to do case studies on some existing ecosystems and find ways for the industrial base and the DoD to come together and leverage some of these programs and work together with these ecosystems. And another big piece to all of this is evaluating impact. That's a really sticky part of all of this. It's almost a little bit easier to evaluate individual programs, but how do you evaluate sequence and all those very, very messy topics. So with that, I will stop and open for questions. Oh. Okay then, great. I think I have convinced everyone in this room for the need for collaboration. Thanks, Ruth. Did you want to say anything?
You did a fine job, Payuna. I wasn't.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes. So if folks need to transition in and out, we can take a few minutes before the next session.